your submission to the Royal Commission into Aged Care was really scathing about both the Labor and your own government's approach to aged care.
Well, Annalise, aged care and the failure to reform in aged care has been an issue that's been around for a long, long time, and indeed the interim report of the Royal Commission itself is very critical of successive governments that have failed to undertake effective reform and proper reform in aged care. And indeed the interim report refers to what it says is the melancholy conclusion that older Australians and those receiving care have not been a high priority for successive governments. Now, we've had review upon review, and some of those reviews have continued to outline the systemic failures in the aged care system. And one very important study that was undertaken was the Productivity Commission report on caring for older Australians, and that report was released in 2011, and that very much informed the work that I had done at the time as Shadow Minister for Ageing, and very much was the basis upon which the 2013 Coalition Policy report was prepared. So this has really been the issue, and now we have a Royal Commission that has basically now said effectively enough is enough. We will promise, and it has promised the Australian public, that it will outline fundamental reform and a total change in the aged care system. And that needs to happen, Annalise, because regrettably we've seen the same things happening over many years, and so now we are at the point where what we're seeing in Victoria is symptomatic of a systematic failures over many, many years.
When you speak of the Productivity Commission report in 2011, you highlight in your submission that none of the suggested reforms were undertaken. What would those reforms have been if they were implemented?
Well, Annalise, the report basically looked at suggestions for an aged care system, bearing in mind the fact that we are coming into a baby boomer generation, and also taking into account the dependency ratios of working people for aged care people. So, for example, today there are about 4 people of working age for every person aged over 65, and by 2058 that's going to be just over 3. So the Productivity Commission not only looked at the systemic failures, but it also looked at the funding issue. And yes, of course, we do have to spend more on aged care because we have an ageing population, but it's important to get that balance between the public funding and the private funding. And in the end, the Productivity Commission concluded that we should have a pay-as-you-go system with higher contributions, a taxed funded system, but with higher co-contributions and certain limits put in place, and of course considerations for people who need a safety net. So it outlined the processes of reform, and what I did was actually take that report and then look at what that could actually be, and road-tested ideas as to how that report could be implemented into fundamental reform, which is still important today, Annalise, which is, of course, is still important today. And indeed, the interim report of the Royal Commission is actually informing itself on the work that was done by the Productivity Commission.
Yes, but we're talking about a report from 2018. 2011. One of the biggest frustrations for ordinary Australians is that they want someone to take responsibility, and they have the state and the federal governments pointing fingers at each other. In this report, you're pretty scathing of the Abbott government. You're saying it's evident that the Abbott government, through relevant ministers and those advising it, failed to articulate the original intent of the coalition aged care election policy. Is this just more finger-pointing?
Annalise, the problems that we had in 2011 and in 2013 have continued on. So therefore, as the interim report of the Royal Commission has stated, successive governments are at fault here. So we know that there are problems. So therefore, how are we going to fix the mistakes of the past? And so therefore, what I am doing at this point in time is providing at a particular critical point of time in a public process, which is important, a public discourse, providing solutions to the problems as I see them. I mean, the problems are still the same. They haven't changed. They've just compounded over the years. And so unless you're going to be prepared to undertake wholesale reform, then you will still have the problems that we are seeing.